Evan Rourke always thought the 4th of July meant safety crowds, noise, and neighbors outside late into the night. But this year, as he stood in the dim light of his porch, the familiar chaos felt wrong. The fireworks didn't sound like celebrations anymore. They came in erratic bursts, each one revealing something tall and unmoving at the end of the street. Beside him, his cousin Marla gripped the railing, her eyes locked on the darkness as if it was staring back. And then, between one explosion and the next, the figures were closer to close, watching them without blinking. The air smelled like gunpowder and grilled meat, a heavy mix that clung to the warm July night. It was the 4th of July, and my neighborhood was alive with a kind of restless energy, the kind that made the air feel charged, almost electric. I could hear the laughter of children echoing down the street, the fizz and pop of sparklers, and the deep, booming cracks of fireworks exploding somewhere beyond the trees. It was the same as every other year, and yet, for some reason I couldn't explain, something about this night felt wrong. It was as if the joy outside was too loud, too forced, like everyone was putting on a show for someone or something that was watching. I lived at the far end of a quiet cul-de-sac, a good distance from the bigger crowds gathering near the park. From my porch I could see slivers of sky between the rooftops and hear the faint rumble of distant explosions. The warm breeze carried smells of barbecues and smoke, and for a while I sat there just soaking it in, telling myself that the feeling in my chest was just nerves from too much caffeine. As the night wore on, I noticed how the fireworks had started to come in strange bursts. Normally, they'd go up one at a time, but now they fired in uneven clusters, 3 in quick succession. Then nothing for a while, then a sudden loud blast that made my ears ring. I leaned forward in my chair, watching one particularly large firework arc into the air. It burst into gold, scattering sparks across the black sky. But before I could look away, another firework shot upward, one I'd never seen before. Instead of exploding into color, it rose and stopped. It just hovered there, a glowing red ball hanging in the darkness like a drop of blood frozen in time. My first thought was that it must have been some kind of malfunction, but the longer I stared, the more wrong it looked. The red light didn't fade. It didn't move. It simply hung there, pulsing faintly, as if it were alive. A few seconds later it began to descend, slowly at first, then faster, drifting down toward the street directly in front of my house. I waited for it to fizzle out, for the smoke to rise, but when it touched the ground, there was no sound at all. The streetlights on my block flickered violently, buzzing in the humid night air. The noise of distant fireworks seemed to dull, as if the whole world had drawn in a deep breath and was holding it. That was when I saw the figure. It stood in the middle of the road, perfectly still. From my porch, I couldn't make out its face, only that it was tall, and naturally tall, with limbs that seemed just a bit too long for its frame. It was facing my house, not the street, not the neighbors, just me. My first instinct was to wave or call out, but I couldn't bring myself to make a sound. My throat was dry, my tongue heavy, and I felt a slow, creeping sensation travel up my spine. The figure didn't move, not even when a nearby firework exploded in a flash of white light. For a brief moment, I thought I saw its head tilt ever so slightly to the side, as if it were studying me. Then the light faded, and the darkness swallowed its outline. I blinked hard, trying to adjust my eyes, but the figure was gone. The street was empty again. I sat there frozen for a few minutes longer, scanning every shadow for movement, telling myself it was nothing, a trick of the light, maybe someone just walking by. But deep down, I knew the truth. That thing had been there. It had been watching me. I eventually went inside, locking the door behind me, though I didn't know why. The fireworks outside continued, their noise somehow sounding further away than before. I went to bed with the curtains shut tight, my mind buzzing with unease. Just before I drifted into a restless sleep, I thought I heard something faint outside my window. Not a voice, not an animal, just the quiet, deliberate sound of breathing. By the time morning came, the warm, sticky air of the night before had turned into a damp, heavy stillness. I tried to push away the memory of what I thought I'd seen in the street, convincing myself that it was just a trick of my tired mind. I told myself that people see strange things on holidays, that maybe it had been a tall neighbor in the wrong lighting, or a stray shadow stretched by the fireworks. But when I stepped outside, any sense of normalcy slipped away. The dew on the grass shimmered under the weak morning sun, and the air smelled faintly of smoke. But in the center of the road, there was something that stopped me in my tracks. It was a dark patch, a misshapen wet stain that seemed to sink into the asphalt. I stood there staring at it, half expecting it to vanish when I blinked, but it didn't. The stain was too deep, too black, with edges that weren't quite natural, almost as if it were burned into the road. I crouched closer, and that was when the smell hit me. It wasn't just smoke. It was metallic, heavy in the back of my throat, the same Thames as rusted metal or dried blood, mixed with the faint chemical sharpness of something burned. I backed away quickly, my stomach tightening. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that some firework debris must have landed there and burned into the pavement. But the explanation didn't feel right. Still, I forced myself to ignore it and went about my day. The hours dragged on, the heat climbing higher, the air thick enough to make every breath feel like an effort. Even inside my house, with the blinds drawn, I could feel the oppressive weight of the day pressing in. As the sun dipped low in the sky, the familiar sounds of the holiday returned, crackling fuses, muffled bursts in the distance, but the rhythm was wrong again. There was no steady build-up to the evening show. The fireworks came at strange intervals, sometimes one right after another, sometimes a long silence followed by an unexpectedly loud explosion. I stood at my window, watching the sky above the trees, and that's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Every time the fireworks lit the sky, the shadows between the houses shifted. It wasn't just the play of light and darkness. The shapes in those shadows moved independently, stretching and twisting in ways that didn't match the angle of the light. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead against the cool glass, straining to see. Between one burst of light and the next, I caught sight of a tall, narrow shape standing in the gap between my neighbor's garage and fence. The next explosion revealed it again, but closer. The strange thing was that the figure didn't move like a person. It didn't step forward or lean, it was simply closer between flashes, as if it had skipped a few feet of distance without passing through the space between. My heart began to pound, my breath quickening, but I couldn't look away. Another firework exploded, scattering red sparks, and now there were more shapes, at least 3 of them, all tall, all still, with heads tilted slightly upward, as if they were watching the fireworks with quiet fascination. I kept counting the bursts, each one revealing the figures closer and closer to my street. The hair on my arms prickled. Their proportions were wrong: arms that hung too low, torsos that seemed slightly too long, and their faces, though the distance and the light made them hard to see. I thought I caught a glimpse of something pale and stretched where their mouths should be. And then came the grand finale from the park, the sky flashing with rapid bursts of gold and silver. The light was blinding, and for several seconds the street was washed in brilliance. When my eyes adjusted, the shapes were gone. The street looked empty, silent except for the fading rumble of the last explosion. I stood there, gripping the window frame, my nails digging into the wood. Just as I started to step back, the final remnants of smoke drifted through the air, and the light from the street lamps flickered faintly. I thought the show was over, but then a single, sharp crack split the silence, a lone firework shooting into the night sky. It burst in pure white, and for the briefest moment before the darkness returned, I saw them again. All of them, dozens now, standing at the far end of the street, their faces tilted toward my house, their mouths stretched impossibly wide in grins that were full of too many teeth. I didn't sleep that night. The images from the fireworks display burned into my mind, replaying over and over every time I closed my eyes. Those faces, or whatever they were, stayed with me in the dark, their grins frozen in my thoughts. The night dragged on in silence, broken only by occasional thuds against the side of my house. They were soft at first, like small branches brushing against the siding, but as the hours passed, they grew louder, heavier, more deliberate. Each sound came from a different side of the house, as if something or several somethings were circling. When the gray light of dawn finally crept in through the blinds, I felt no relief. My head was pounding, my stomach heavy with the weight of dread. I walked the perimeter of the house, telling myself I was just looking for damage from the wind or maybe animals. But when I reached the side near my bedroom, I froze. The paint along the wall was peeled back in jagged strips, and deep gouges were cut into the wood beneath, like claw marks. They were far too high off the ground for any raccoon or stray dog. I traced one with my fingers, feeling the splintered edges, and realized whatever made them had been trying to pry the wall open. I considered calling the police, but my mind went back to the strange stain in the road, the flickering lights, the moving shadows. How could I even explain that without sounding insane? They'd say it was vandalism or a prank, just like they always did in small towns. Still, I called the non-emergency line, and a tired voice on the other end told me it was probably kids causing trouble after the holiday. They promised to send someone when available, which I knew meant not anytime soon. The rest of the day passed in a haze. The air outside felt different again, thicker, heavier. The neighborhood seemed quieter than usual, too. No kids playing, no lawnmowers, not even a car driving by. It was as if everyone had disappeared, or decided all at once to stay indoors. That night I left every light in the house on and sat in the living room with the TV muted, just so I could hear if anything came near. The fireworks started again, though the 4th was already over. They weren't the organized, colorful bursts from the park. These were sporadic, dull flashes in the distance, too low to be part of any real show. Every time they went off, I caught myself scanning the windows, expecting to see those tall figures again. Around midnight, the first rumble came. It was faint, almost like a passing truck, but it vibrated through the floorboards, lasted only a few seconds, then faded, only to return stronger minutes later. My glass of water trembled on the coffee table, tiny ripples forming on the surface. I stood up, unsure whether to run to the window or away from it, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a town emergency alert, the kind usually reserved for severe storms or missing persons. The message was short, all in capital letters: stay inside, avoid windows. That was it. No explanation, no warning of what was happening. My fingers tightened around the phone, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The rumble grew again, and then the tapping started. It was slow at first, a faint click against the glass behind me. My body went rigid. I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance over my shoulder, and saw nothing, just the reflection of the lit room in the window. The tapping grew louder, faster, until it was a steady rhythm. I took a step back, my skin prickling, and the sound stopped abruptly. My reflection in the window shifted, though I hadn't moved. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable. But my heart seized when I realized my reflection was still tapping. Its fingers, longer and thinner than mine, were pressed against the glass, each nail dragging slightly before lifting to tap again. Before I could react, the lights in the house flickered, and the reflection smiled at me. The smile was too wide, the teeth too sharp. When the light steadied, the window was empty again, showing only the dark street outside. Somewhere in the distance, another firework went off, its muffled pop followed by a faint, inhuman sound carried on the wind. It was almost like laughter, low, slow, and getting closer. I didn't move for what felt like minutes after the laughter faded. My body felt locked in place, my mind running in circles trying to explain what I'd seen in that window. The reflection hadn't just been wrong, it had been aware of me, studying me. The image of those long fingers tapping against the glass played on repeat in my head, each sound echoing in my ears. Even though the room was silent now, I told myself to keep breathing, to stay calm. But the air in the house felt heavier with each passing second, as if something unseen was pressing down on the walls. When I finally forced myself to turn fully toward the window, I was met with darkness so deep it looked almost solid. The porch light was still on, but it barely seemed to reach past the glass. It was like someone had draped a thick black sheet over the outside world. I pressed my face closer, trying to see through, but there was nothing, no shapes, no light from the street lamps, no reflection of my own face, just that dense, swallowing black. I felt a cold draft coming through the frame, the kind of chill that seemed to seep straight into my bones. I stepped back quickly, moving toward the center of the room, and that was when I heard its soft, deliberate tapping again, only this time from the opposite side of the house. I turned my head sharply toward the sound, and my stomach twisted. The tapping wasn't random, it had a rhythm to it. 3 slow taps, a pause, then 2 quick taps, almost like a code. The pattern repeated twice before stopping abruptly, replaced by a new sound from outside, sharp pops spaced unevenly, like sticks breaking or joints snapping. I stood there frozen, every instinct screaming at me not to look. But the noise moved closer, circling the house just as the thuds had the night before. Between the cracks and pops I caught faint scrapes along the siding, as though something was dragging its nails across the walls as it passed. My heart pounded harder with every step it took. Then the sound stopped right beneath the living room window. Without thinking, I reached over and switched off the lamp. My eyes adjusted slowly to the dimness, and in the faint light from the hallway, I could just barely make out the outline of something on the other side of the glass. It was pressed so close that the surface seemed to bow inward. I couldn't see its features, only the pale impression of its shape, but I knew it was staring directly at me. Then, without warning, it pulled away. Not like a person stepping back, but like a piece of cloth being yanked out of sight. I rushed to the window and peered out, but the darkness outside seemed even thicker now. The street beyond was silent, lifeless. That's when I realized the houses across from mine were completely dark. No porch lights, no glow from inside, nothing. Every driveway was empty, like the neighborhood had been abandoned in the middle of the night. A sudden burst of color lit the far horizon, a lone firework, blue and gold, exploding soundlessly above the tree line. For just a split second, the light illuminated the street in front of my house. They were there again. Dozens of them. Tall, pale figures, all standing in perfectly still rows, facing my house. None of them moved, but even from a distance, I could see the sharp gleam of teeth catching the fireworks light. The darkness closed back in, and my vision was swallowed whole. The air felt heavier now. The silence outside so absolute it was almost a physical presence. I stepped back from the window, but the floor under my feet felt different, softer, like the boards had loosened or warped. Somewhere deep beneath the house, I heard that low rumble again, vibrating through my legs. I stood there, gripping the arm of the couch, my pulse racing, and thought about calling for help. But even as the idea formed, another thought rose in the back of my mind, cold and certain. Whatever was out there already knew I was alone, and whatever it wanted, it wasn't going to wait for me to make the first move. Somewhere outside, just beyond the blackness, I heard the faint sound of footsteps in the grass, slow, deliberate, and getting closer. I knew I couldn't just stand there and wait for whatever was outside to come in. The footsteps in the grass were steady, patient, never hurrying, as if the thing knew there was nowhere for me to go. My eyes darted around the living room, landing on my keys on the coffee table. My car was parked right outside, and if I could just make it there, maybe I could get out of this place altogether. I grabbed the keys with a shaking hand, my fingers slick with sweat, and took a deep breath. The moment I touched the doorknob, I realized the footsteps had stopped. The night outside was silent again, too silent. I opened the door anyway. The world outside was gone. My street, my neighbors' houses, the familiar sidewalk, all of it had vanished. In its place stretched an endless, open field under a black, starless sky. The air was thick, clinging to my skin like a damp cloth, and it smelled faintly of earth and something metallic. The ground beneath my feet was soft, giving way slightly like wet sand, and each step I took made a dull sucking sound. I turned around, desperate to see my house, but it wasn't there. Where it should have been was only more of that endless black field. Far ahead, faint flickers of red, white, and blue glimmered in the distance. At first I thought they might be fireworks, but as I squinted through the heavy darkness, I saw they weren't bursting or fading. They were moving, three pulsing lights, swaying together in slow, deliberate patterns, as if they were breathing. I didn't want to move toward them, but something about the emptiness around me made standing still feel worse. I began walking, each step sinking slightly into the damp earth. The further I went, the louder the sound became, a deep, steady rhythm, like a single massive breath being drawn and released over and over. It didn't come from one direction. It was all around me, vibrating through the air and the ground. My chest tightened with each inhale, as if the field itself were trying to pull the air from my lungs. The lights ahead grew brighter, revealing faint silhouettes around them. When I got close enough to see clearly, my stomach lurched. The lights weren't fireworks at all. They were burning shapes, floating just above the ground. They weren't flames in the normal sense. They didn't flicker or twist. Instead, they pulsed, expanding and contracting in perfect unison. Around them stood the tall figures, dozens of them, each one motionless, their faces lit in flashes by the glowing lights. They were wrong in every way a human could be wrong. Their skin was pale, almost gray, stretched too tightly over long, angular bones. Their mouths hung open in silent grins, teeth sharp and too many, lining not just the top and bottom but the sides of their jaws. Their heads tilted slowly, all in the same direction, as if tracking some sound I couldn't hear. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs refused to move. The pulsing lights began to quicken, and with each beat, the figures' bodies seemed to twitch closer, their long arms swaying slightly. The deep rhythmic breathing grew louder, until it felt like my own chest was being forced to match it. Then, without warning, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The sudden vibration was jarring in the oppressive silence. My hands trembled as I pulled it out, expecting to see another town alert, but the screen was black except for 3 words in bold, white letters. Don't turn around. I didn't know what was behind me, but the message hit me with a cold certainty that something was there now, inches away. I could feel warmth on the back of my neck, a slow exhale against my skin. My muscles locked, and I kept my eyes on the figures in front of me, who had stopped moving entirely. The lights pulsed one last time, brighter than before, and for a split second I thought I saw the figures' mouths stretch even wider, their teeth glinting like shards of glass. The phone buzzed again. The same words repeated, "Don't turn around." I never saw what was behind me. I never even had the chance to move before the ground beneath my feet gave way, and I was pulled downward into darkness so absolute it swallowed the very sound of my own scream.